Emma Clark had never been the impulsive type. Her life was carefully structured, ruled by routines and quiet discipline. As a dedicated nurse working long shifts at a hospital in Portland, she was used to putting others first and herself last. Love for her had always been something distant, something she observed in others but rarely allowed into her own life. She had been in a few relationships in the past, but none that ever made her feel secure. Each time, it ended the same way, with disappointment, distance, and silence. That's why when she met Daniel Moore, everything felt different. She encountered him at a coffee shop on a rainy Sunday morning. She had spilled her drink on his laptop by accident, and instead of reacting with anger or frustration, he smiled and told her it was an old one he was planning to replace anyway. There was a calmness to him, a steady and patient energy that stood out immediately. He offered to buy her another coffee, and they talked for hours. From that moment on, they became nearly inseparable. Daniel was everything Emma thought she wanted. He had a quiet charm, dressed neatly, and spoke with the kind of confidence that didn't feel forced. He worked in IT security, a field Emma didn't fully understand, but he explained things in simple terms that made her feel involved.
He never raised his voice, never criticized her, and always seemed to know what to say to make her feel better after long, draining days at work. Within a few weeks, he had become a constant presence in her life. He'd leave handwritten notes
on the mirror, prepare her favorite meals, and surprise her with flowers for no reason at all. Their relationship moved quickly, but nothing ever felt rushed. Friends told her she was glowing. Her mother, who had always been skeptical of her boyfriends, actually liked Daniel from the first meeting. He was respectful, attentive, and polite. He remembered birthdays, planned weekend getaways, and even got along well with her friends. He wasn't overly affectionate in public, but behind closed doors, he showed a gentle tenderness that made her feel safe. After 6 months, they decided to move in together. Emma offered to move into his apartment because it was larger and closer to her workplace. Daniel seemed hesitant at first, but then agreed. When she moved in, she noticed that the place was almost too neat, minimalist to the point of being impersonal. The walls were bare, and there were no personal photos or decorations. Daniel said he preferred simplicity, and Emma accepted that. She figured they'd turn it into a home together over time. The first couple of weeks living together were smooth. Daniel kept to a routine, just like her. He woke up early, made coffee, and always had breakfast ready when she stepped out of the shower. He never complained, never left dishes in the sink, and always seemed to know what she needed before she said it. At night, they would curl up on the couch and watch old movies or read side by side. It felt almost too perfect, but small things started to catch her attention. Daniel never used social media, which Emma initially admired. He said he didn't like putting his life online. But he also never talked about his past. No stories from childhood, no old friends, and not a single mention of family. When Emma brought it up, he brushed it off with vague answers. He claimed his parents had passed away and that he didn't have siblings. He said he had moved around a lot and didn't like keeping in touch with people from his past. One night, while cleaning the kitchen, Emma found an old photo tucked behind a drawer. It was a group picture of several people at a beach, with Daniel standing at the back. He looked younger and was smiling. When she asked about it later, he seemed startled. He quickly said it was an old company retreat and threw the photo into, a drawer. Something in his tone made her drop the subject. There was also a closet in the hallway Daniel kept locked. He told her it was full of old cables, wires, and other electronic junk that she wouldn't be interested in. He said it was messy, and he didn't want her to get hurt poking around. At first, she believed him. He was in IT after all. It made sense that he'd have some outdated equipment. But over time, her curiosity grew. Every time she passed the closet, she felt drawn to it. There was something about the way Daniel carefully avoided it, never opening it in front of her, always keeping the key on him, that made her uneasy. Daniel also had a strange habit of walking around late at night. Emma would sometimes wake up around 2 or 3 a.m. and hear soft footsteps in the living room. When she got up to check, he would be sitting quietly in the dark, staring out the window or pretending to scroll on his phone. When she asked what he was doing, he always had an excuse. He couldn't sleep, he was checking work emails, or he was just thinking. She accepted his answers but started sleeping with one ear open. One day, Emma's best friend Lucy visited and made a passing joke about how Daniel seemed too perfect. She laughed it off, but the comment stuck in her mind. Emma began to notice how Daniel always knew where she was. He never asked where she had been. He just seemed to already know. Once, she mentioned a patient she had treated that day, and he said something about the patient's name before she had ever said it. She brushed it off as coincidence, but deep down, she felt a flicker of doubt. Still, Emma didn't want to jump to conclusions. She told herself she was overthinking it. Daniel had been nothing but kind, supportive, and loving. Maybe she was just afraid because things were going well, too well. But as the days passed, that flicker of doubt refused to go away. Something about the man she loved didn't add up, and without knowing it, Emma was already walking deeper into a carefully constructed illusion, one where love and comfort hid something far more dangerous, one she might not escape from if she didn't start asking the right questions. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning. Daniel had told Emma he'd be away for the weekend attending a mandatory training session for work in Seattle. He packed lightly, kissed her goodbye, and left just after sunrise. As his car disappeared down the street, Emma stood at the door for a few seconds longer than usual. Something about the way he left didn't sit right with her. Too calm, too precise. Still, she shook off the feeling and went back inside, determined to enjoy a weekend to herself. The apartment felt unusually still without him. Emma moved through the space, tidying up out of habit, rearranging a few things, and doing laundry. She had no intention of snooping, but as she walked past the hallway closet, the one Daniel always kept locked, she noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar. The latch hadn't clicked into place. Her heartbeat quickened. It was the first time in all their months together that the door wasn't locked. She hesitated. She could hear Daniel's voice in her head, warning her not to touch it. But curiosity was a powerful thing. Her hand reached out slowly, fingers trembling, and she pulled the door open. Inside, she expected to find tangled wires and dusty electronics. Instead, she found a meticulously organized space. 3 large plastic bins were stacked on top of each other. A faint scent of old paper and plastic lingered in the air. The top bin was labeled in neat handwriting, AK. Emma pulled it down and opened the lid. Inside were dozens of small, leather-bound notebooks, each one carefully labeled with a woman's name and a date range. Her breath caught in her throat. She picked one up at random. The name on the front was Melanie R., May to August, 2018. She flipped through the pages. Each entry was written with obsessive detail. Descriptions of daily movements, outfits, conversations, favorite coffee orders, gym routines, even descriptions of private phone calls. There were notes on what time she left for work, who she spoke to, what she looked like when she smiled. There were sketches of her face, copies of what looked like text messages, and photos taped to the back page. Candid photos taken from a distance. None of it seemed like the harmless musings of a secret admirer. It felt clinical, cold, dangerous. Emma's hands trembled as she opened another journal, then another. Each one followed the same pattern. Different names, different dates, but the same unnerving attention to detail. There were at least 30 of them across all 3 bins. Some of the dates stretched back nearly a decade. The most recent one stopped just a few months before she and Daniel met. It felt like her stomach had dropped out of her body. She sat on the floor, surrounded by the notebooks, her mind spinning. These weren't just observations. They were surveillance logs. She had no idea who these women were or what happened to them, but she couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that they hadn't just walked away from their lives. Something terrible had happened, and she was now part of the pattern. Emma pulled out her phone and began taking pictures of everything, each journal, each name, each disturbing page. She needed proof. She didn't know what to do yet, but her instincts told her she might not have a lot of time. Her thoughts raced through possibilities. Could she go to the police? What would she tell them? That her boyfriend kept journals? About women? That alone might not be enough, but she knew deep down that something far more sinister was going on. She spent the rest of the day scouring the apartment. Her fear mounted with each hour. In a drawer in Daniel's nightstand, she found a USB flash drive taped to the bottom. She plugged it into her laptop and found folders of documents, photos of women, surveillance camera footage, audio recordings. Some of the files were dated years ago. The videos were worse than she imagined. Hours of footage showing women walking down streets, sitting in cafes, grocery shopping, reading in parks, always. Unaware, always alone. He had followed them, recorded them, and kept everything. Emma felt sick. The room spun around her. This was no longer something she could rationalize or explain away. Daniel wasn't just secretive. He was dangerous. She didn't know what had happened to the women in those journals, but she feared the worst. Later that evening, she poured herself a glass of water and sat on the couch, numb. The apartment she had once considered her safe space now felt like a trap. Every photo frame, every piece of furniture felt like it was part of a lie. She tried to remember any red flags she had ignored, moments that didn't feel right. There were too many to count now. She had been so eager to believe in something good that she had looked the other way each time her instincts screamed at her. Sleep didn't come easily that night. She kept the bedroom light on, phone clutched tightly in her hand. Every creak, every sound outside the window sent her heart racing. She kept imagining Daniel walking through the door, asking why she had gone into the closet. She didn't know if she'd be able to lie or if he would even let her. That was the terrifying part. She no longer knew what he was capable of. Next morning, she went online and began searching for the women's names listed on the journals. She started with a few of the most recent ones. It didn't take long to find them. Some of the names appeared in missing persons reports. One woman had vanished after a morning jog. Another had left work and never arrived home. A third had disappeared from her apartment without signs of forced entry. There were no arrests, no suspects, just long lists of unanswered questions and grieving families. Emma sat frozen in front of her computer screen. She clicked through article after article, each One painting the same grim picture, sudden disappearances with no explanations and no clues. The women had vanished into thin air, leaving behind empty apartments and broken families. Emma was beginning to understand that she wasn't just living with someone secretive or strange. She was living with someone who had likely destroyed lives. She closed the laptop and stared out the window. The world outside continued as usual. Cars driving by, neighbors walking dogs, birds flying across a pale sky. But inside, everything had changed. She felt like she was standing at the edge of something dark, something vast and terrible. And there was no going back. Somewhere on the road, Daniel was driving back home, and Emma had to figure out what to do before he arrived. Emma didn't leave the apartment that day. Her every move was calculated, every noise amplified by the deafening silence that surrounded her. The cozy space that once brought her comfort now felt like a ticking time bomb. She kept checking her phone, watching the hours count down until Daniel's return. Her mind was torn between fear and strategy. She knew she couldn't confront him directly. She had seen enough to know that Daniel was more than just disturbed. He was careful, methodical, and deeply dangerous. She couldn't afford a single mistake. She copied the contents of the USB drive onto her laptop, then uploaded a backup to a cloud drive under a fake email account she had just created. Every file, photo, and video was duplicated and hidden in places Daniel would never think to look. She hid her own phone charger and set up a timed email with the link to the cloud folder, set to send to herself and a friend if she didn't log in again in the next 48 hours. It was a desperate insurance policy, but it gave her a thin layer of protection. As the sun began to set, Emma started packing a small bag with essentials, just enough to not raise suspicion. She kept the bag hidden in the hallway closet, ready to grab if she had to leave quickly. Her plan was to wait until Daniel returned, act completely normal, and then quietly gather more evidence while pretending everything was fine. Once she had enough, she'd go to the police, but she underestimated just how close Daniel was. At 7:38 p.m., the front door opened. He walked in with his usual calm demeanor, setting his bag down and smiling at her. He looked tired but pleased to be home. He kissed her on the cheek and asked how her weekend was. Emma forced a smile, carefully matching his energy. She said she relaxed, read a little, watched some movies. Her voice didn't tremble. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times throughout the day. Daniel nodded and went to the kitchen. He poured them each a glass of wine and began talking about his trip, boring details about traffic, the conference room, the people he met. Emma listened, nodding at all the right moments, pretending to care. Her heart pounded in her chest with every word. She watched how he moved, how he looked at her, analyzing his body language for any sign he knew what she had done. He didn't. Least, not yet. They ate dinner like normal. He asked if she wanted to watch a movie, and she agreed. They sat on the couch with a blanket, just like always. His arm around her felt heavier than usual, like a chain. Every second was agony. Her thoughts raced with what she had seen in the journals and on the USB drive. Every time he touched her, she felt sick, but she said nothing. She couldn't. Not until she knew more. Around midnight, Daniel went to bed. Emma said she'd join him soon and waited until she heard his steady breathing. She slipped out of the bedroom quietly, sat down at her laptop, and began going through the files again. She hadn't had time to view everything before. Now she clicked through folders labeled by year. Inside each, she found more images and videos, more logs, more names. Then she opened a folder labeled Current. What she saw froze her to the core. Photos of herself, taken from a distance. Some from her workplace, others from when she was out shopping or jogging. Images from before they ever met at the coffee shop. Dozens of them. Dates, times, locations. There were even pages copied from her social media accounts, old blog posts and high school photos. He had been watching her long before they met, Read through detailed notes, her routines, favorite foods, doctors she had visited, even the names of her friends and family. Daniel hadn't stumbled into her life by accident. He had chosen her, targeted her. Everything she thought was spontaneous. The coffee shop, the connection, the shared interests. It was all part of a careful design. He had constructed an identity, tailored to her personality, crafted to earn her trust. He hadn't fallen in love with her. He had studied her, like a case file. Her chest tightened. She scrolled further and found a subfolder titled Emma Phase 2. The documents inside were newer. One file was a checklist. Each item made her blood run cold. Gain trust, move in, isolate from friends, monitor movements, confirm emotional dependency, begin documentation. The last item was unchecked, transition. She didn't know what transition meant, but the word alone was terrifying. Emma closed the folder and backed away from the laptop. She realized she wasn't just in danger. She was likely next. The next journal. The next disappearance. The next unsolved mystery. She grabbed her packed bag from the hallway closet and slipped on her shoes. Every movement was slow, silent. Her mind screamed at her to run, but she had to stay quiet. She didn't know if Daniel had hidden cameras, if he was monitoring her computer, or if he was already awake, watching her from the shadows. She reached for the door and carefully turned the knob. It wouldn't budge. The deadbolt was locked. She hadn't locked it. Panic surged through her as she fumbled for the key she had always kept on the counter. It wasn't there. She turned around slowly and stopped. Daniel was standing in the hallway. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't speaking. He just stared at her with a calm, unreadable expression. In his hand, he held the key. For a moment, neither of them moved. Emma's heartbeat was thundering in her ears. She tried to mask the fear on her face, but it was too late. He knew. He stepped closer, slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. Emma did the only thing she could think of. She ran. Emma darted, past Daniel with a surge of adrenaline she didn't know she had. Her shoulder brushed his as she pushed through the narrow hallway. He tried to grab her arm, but she twisted free and sprinted toward the back of the apartment. There was only one other way out, the small balcony off the bedroom. It wasn't ideal. They were on the 3rd floor, but if she could get over the railing and drop onto the bush-covered slope below, maybe she'd have a chance. She reached the bedroom and slammed the door shut behind her, flipping the lock in one fluid motion. Daniel's footsteps followed seconds later, heavy and deliberate. She didn't wait. She yanked open the balcony door, rushed outside, and scanned the edge. Below her, the drop looked brutal, a mess of hedges and concrete. But she didn't have time to think. Behind her, the bedroom door exploded open. Daniel had kicked it down. Emma climbed onto the railing and jumped. The fall knocked the breath out of her. She landed awkwardly on her side, pain shooting through her ribs and ankle. She rolled into the bushes, her vision swimming, but she didn't stop. She pulled herself to her feet, limping away from the building as fast as her body allowed. She could hear shouting behind her, but she didn't look back. She reached the sidewalk, flagged down the first car she saw, a young couple, startled by her bleeding arm and frantic expression. She begged them to drive. They didn't ask questions. As the car pulled away from the curb, Emma looked out the back window. Daniel stood in the apartment doorway just watching, unmoving, his face blank. She didn't go home. She didn't go to a friend's. She asked the couple to drop her off at the nearest police station. Inside, she told them everything. It took hours. At first, the officers listened politely, trying to piece together the story of a woman fleeing her boyfriend. But as Emma showed them the USB copies, the photographs, the journals she had taken pictures of, the mood changed. Detectives were cooled. Statements were taken. They asked her to go over every detail twice, then again. The notebooks, the photos, the folder labeled current, and the checklist. She gave them the fake email account, the cloud folder, every password. By C. Morning. They had obtained a search warrant, but when they arrived at Daniel's apartment, it was empty. The hard drives were gone. The journals were missing. Every trace of evidence had been erased in less than 8 hours. The bedroom door was still splintered from when he broke in. But Daniel had vanished. It became a full investigation. The media picked up the story, though. Emma's name was kept out of it at first. She was relocated to a hotel under temporary protection. Detectives combed through her statements and tried to verify the names in the journals. More missing person reports were matched. Melanie R. wasn't the only one. At least 7 other women were now linked to the case. All vanished. All unsolved. What disturbed investigators the most was the level of planning. Daniel had no criminal record, no flagged background. He'd moved every few years, always under slightly different names, but close enough to avoid suspicion. He paid everything in cash. His jobs were freelance, mostly in tech. He never stayed in one place too long. He blended in perfectly. His real name wasn't even Daniel. Authorities released a composite sketch to the public, and tips began pouring in. A man matching his description had been seen in several states over the past decade. One caller claimed he dated her sister 3 years ago and vanished suddenly. Another said he was her neighbor once but moved out overnight. The pattern was always the same: charming, reserved, private, and then gone without warning. Emma followed the case closely, though it haunted her every day. She barely slept, constantly checking the locks, her phone, the hallways of wherever she stayed. The fear didn't leave, even with police nearby. She kept reliving the moment he appeared in. That hallway with the key in his hand. He hadn't said anything. He hadn't needed to. 2 weeks passed without a single confirmed sighting. Then, out of nowhere, a discovery shifted the entire case. Deep in the woods of a remote area 3 hours from Emma's city, a hiker stumbled across something disturbing. What looked like an old storage unit hidden behind overgrown brush and trees. Inside were boxes of notebooks, burned photos, and pieces of clothing, half decayed. Forensics confirmed it. This was one of Daniel's hiding spots. Some items matched women reported missing years ago. Investigators now had tangible evidence. DNA was pulled. The story went national. And yet, Daniel, or whatever his real name was, remained a ghost. Emma was moved again. Her life was no longer her own. She didn't return to work. She stopped seeing friends. Every knock at the door, every unknown number, felt like the start of something terrible. The police kept her updated, but the trail was cold. Whoever he was, he had done this before, and he had learned to disappear. But she couldn't help wondering, why had he chosen her? She thought back to the journal labeled Emma, Phase 2. The steps were clear, deliberate. He hadn't loved her. He hadn't even really known her. He had studied her, like a puzzle to solve. What made her different from the others? Or had something gone wrong in his plan? Did she act too soon, too late? The worst part was not knowing what transition meant. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined different meanings. None of them ended well. Sometimes she wondered if he was still watching, if he had anticipated her escape, if letting her run had been part of it. But then she stopped herself. That path led only to madness. She had survived. Others hadn't. And now she was determined to help bring him down. But she also knew, deep in her heart, that Daniel wasn't finished. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Despite multiple investigations, public tips, and dedicated task forces, Daniel remained missing. Emma tried to move on, or at least pretend to, but her life had changed forever. She no longer trusted strangers, rarely spoke to people she didn't know, and avoided crowds. She relocated again under a new identity provided by a victim protection program. A new apartment, new job, new name. But the fear still traveled with her, like a shadow that never left. She was no longer the cheerful, trusting woman who once thought she had met the love of her life in a quiet coffee shop. Now, every noise startled her, every strange glance sent her heart racing. The sound of keys turning in a lock, footsteps in a hallway, even a phone notification, all made her freeze, wondering if he had come back. Because deep down, Emma was convinced of one terrifying truth. Daniel was still watching. The police never officially confirmed it, but she knew from subtle things they said, small precautions they advised her to take, that they also suspected he might return. A man like him didn't just disappear. He was too calculated, too patient, too obsessive. She often found herself looking over her shoulder, especially at night. She took different routes to work, changed her routines constantly, and avoided telling anyone too much about herself. But the fear still lived inside her bones. Then one morning, something changed. Emma woke up to a knock at her door. Her new place had tight security, with only law enforcement and a few vetted contacts having access to her address. She peered through the peephole and saw two plainclothes detectives. She recognized one of them from earlier interviews. She opened the door cautiously. Their expressions were serious. They had news. A body had been discovered near the border of a neighboring state. It was badly decomposed, buried deep in a makeshift grave in the forest. It took weeks of forensic testing, but they confirmed the identity through dental records. The remains belonged to Melanie R., the woman whose ID Emma had found in Daniel's journal. The confirmation of Melanie's death shifted the case from missing persons to homicide. Emma felt sick when she heard it. She had held out hope, even if it was faint, that Melanie might still be alive, held somewhere, or had escaped. But the discovery of her body only cemented the reality. Daniel had killed her, and likely many others. What Emma had escaped was not just emotional manipulation or obsession, it was murder. Cold, calculated murder. This new evidence pushed the investigation into overdrive. Law enforcement re-examined every piece of information Emma had provided. They started locating and interviewing families of other women connected to Daniel's. Notes. A disturbing pattern emerged. Each woman had a life eerily similar to Emma's, independent, introverted, often without close family ties, and active online. Each one had been carefully selected, observed, and then approached by Daniel under different identities. It was like a script he had followed over and over again. With mounting pressure, the FBI joined the case. A profile was built. They believed Daniel was highly intelligent, emotionally detached, and obsessed with control. His calm nature and ability to mimic normal behavior made him almost invisible. He was likely still using new aliases, possibly living off-grid or blending into a new community. But there was one chilling conclusion all investigators agreed on. He wouldn't stop. He never had. Emma struggled with this knowledge. She was the only known survivor, and that thought gave her a strange responsibility. She worked closely with investigators, revisiting every memory, every detail, every moment of her time with Daniel. She described the way he spoke, the way he moved, how he handled stress, even what books he read, anything that might help them catch him. Then came the twist no one expected. A tip came in from a quiet town 2 states away. A woman had reported strange behavior from a man she had been dating for a few months. He went by a different name, claimed to be a writer, and lived alone. At first, he was charming and sweet. But slowly, she noticed odd things: missing personal items, strange entries in his notebook, and a locked drawer she wasn't allowed to open. She had seen the news report about Daniel's case and called the number listed on the tip line. Authorities moved quickly. They arrived at the man's home with a warrant. What they found inside was chilling. Multiple fake IDs, photographs of the woman who had filed the report, taken without her knowledge, and a folder labeled Phase 1 Subject. Andrea. They were too late. Daniel had moved again just days before the warrant was executed. He left behind most of his materials, likely as a distraction or to buy himself time. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station caught him filling up a car under yet another fake name. That footage was the most recent confirmed sighting of H.